In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck. The Forward Party?
No.
Andrew Yang's party? They're the ones that are promoting their big focus is ranked choice voting. And so I gave them a little money and they gave me this shirt.
Yeah. Ranked choice voting. I do. He has some interesting ideas, Andrew Yang.
Yeah, he does. So I'm here shilling for the guy who gave me some clothing.
Good.
We decided that this would be a good time to talk. I guess kind of a playback. Think of this like ESPN Monday morning. We're going to go and look at all the games on Sunday, except one game in particular, and kind of go over the experience. And I think that maybe you and I had very different experiences here. So I'm very curious to see how this goes. You want to do you want to start it off?
Sure. Very different experiences. I'm not certain exactly what you mean by that. I guess um my experience was this. It seemed like there was an idea that you had some data, and if I tried to, and it felt like I would try to kind of poke holes in the data or in the methodology, um, or kind of present some other pieces of data. And it was like, well, let's go back to the data again. And then, I try to poke more holes in it. And, we were just kind of back and forth. Like you didn't want to let go of the idea that either there was no bias or um, it's not really biased because even though the right is affected more somewhat disproportionately, that's justified. Does that make sense? And then I would try to give examples, but it just felt like we were talking past each other. I didn't want to accept that your take on it, and you didn't want to really accept mine. Is
Okay,
that is
that's
that how you
okay.
felt?
That's I'm glad that we were able to get that out. And so my perspective, yeah, was a little bit different. I felt that what you were presenting was anecdotes in terms of two anonymous people said that they saw some conservatives being treated badly on one of the social media sites, and then your other major point was that that these companies are most of the people that work at these companies would identify as liberal as opposed to conservative. And so my reaction to that was, well, that's not evidence of bias. It definitely would indicate that there could be bias, but not that there is bias. And of course the anecdote that you gave from in that reporting was just that. That's an anecdote. It doesn't really prove anything. It's someone said they saw something. They could have seen it accurately. They could be lying, but it also there could be many people that have seen different things. So seeing a behavior doesn't indicate a culprit culture, and that was my issue with that one.
Well, I would take issue a little bit with that when you say that it isn't evidence. You might say, well, it's not conclusive evidence, but it is evidence. I mean, in a court of law, if somebody says, I saw Brian steal something, that's evidence. I mean, it's eyewitness testimony. Now, I get it. It doesn't prove the point for a number of reasons. One, they could be lying. Two, maybe it was just some small piece. Three, maybe it happened in 2016 and it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, when you write all this stuff off that I'm saying and saying, well, that's not evidence. That's not, oh, you said that's not evidence. I mean, it is evidence. You might say, well, it's not conclusive or it doesn't sway me or convince me. It is evidence. I mean, just like it was, I wondered what your take was on the fact that we had the one discussion removed from YouTube. Was that at all surprising to you? What did you like that to me? It seemed like a very timely removal from YouTube.
Well, I mean, it is interesting. And if we can go back to your example for a second, I'll definitely address that.
Sure,
When you
sure.
said, someone sees Brian stealing, um, that is an eyewitness. But what we're talking about is not did a particular action occur. The point of the conversation is there a corporate culture in which this is frequent, prevalent, common? And so to say that one event happened is not an indication of corporate culture. It's a we there could have been an individual bad actor. It could have
Brian,
been representing bad corporate culture.
you're not addressing what I just said. I agree. You're kind of repeating what I said, but acting as if you're disagreeing with it. I said you just, in the statement before you had said that's not evidence. I said you shouldn't say that. It is evidence. It might not be conclusive evidence. It might not be, prove my point or convince you totally. And then you went and instead of kind of agreeing and saying, yeah, that's true, I shouldn't have said it's not evidence, you kind of said the same thing that I said. Well, it isn't convincing me because it might not be, proving everything that you're trying to make it prove. Well, that's fair. I agree. It doesn't prove my point, but it is evidence. I mean, these little things, and you might say, well, listen, it's so small, it doesn't matter. Like you could attack it in some way, but to say it's not evidence. I mean, it was the article that you had given me, and it gave that story that those two people, there was a Gizmodo, somebody was reporting on that. I mean, that's how reporting works. You get, people that are leaking a story. You get somebody who's a whistleblower, and you report on their story. That's how it works. And then, the fact that 92% of Facebook, 97% of the inordinate number of people at these companies are left leaning is a bit telling. And then everybody who's complaining from the right is complaining because they feel like they've been shadow banned. They feel like they've been suppressed. The example of suppression that we got from Facebook was right wing. And everybody on the left says, they're not saying, well, I think I got shadow banned. They're saying, I don't think you suppressed the right side enough. They have all these crazy stories. I mean, you did present a good article, and I thought it was a pretty good study which looked at what was actually happening. And I wasn't completely swayed, and we could go into the details of that study where they looked at essentially what they're saying is the reason why the right feels like they are suppressed or what because the reason the right feels that there's a right-wing bias is because they get kicked off of the platform more of their stories are suppressed, and the reason is because they share more fake news. Is that essentially what that article said?
No, no, there was some the with the art, and if we're talking about the same article, the article said simply that uh, the by the study that they had done, the far right, not the middle right, the far right is more likely to share fake news. Now, there are some conclusions that are made by other people from that statement that there's a causation of sharing of fake news and the reaction of the social media companies to that.
Yeah, well, what they said was more people on the right are um, have been suspended from the platform. More people on the right have had their news stories suppressed. And then they went and said, but the reason is because people on the right are sharing more fake news. Now, I agree with you. I don't think they said specifically it's probably the far right. I mean, I think that's one of the things that made that study less convincing to me was because, yeah, if you have a bunch of people that are white supremacists and we're going to call them right wing or far right or something, and we say, well, the right shares more fake news stories, and you include in that white supremacists, they probably do share a lot of fake news. So that those studies, like while they were evidence, and maybe they should have been more convincing, than just anecdotes that I was providing, but they are not convincing completely to me either because of those reasons that you just stated, or that reason that you just stated, and that reason that I just stated. It's not convincing to me because there's a lot of plausible explanations as to why this stuff could be happening. But I mean, when you look at what's happening in social media today, almost nobody on the left is complaining about the fact that the left is getting banned from social media. In fact, what people on the left say is the right isn't getting banned enough. People on the right say we're getting banned. I mean, that's an indication to me. I know it's not conclusive or comprehensive evidence, but it is an indication of something. And then to have our story, like, who do you think that they disagree with? Like in that particular discussion that we had, I agreed much more closely with the right side of the aisle, with Republicans. And I don't think it was your statements that were bothering them in our discussion about vaccine mandates. Just to tell people who those two or three listeners that we have out there who might be listening, we had a discussion on vaccine mandates. I don't know how long ago it was.
It was our very first conversation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And YouTube removed it from their platform because of misinformation.
Just a couple of days ago.
Just a couple of days ago. And you and I, as I saw that, it wasn't like, I wonder what Brian said, or I wonder which one of us it was. It was me. We both know that. It wasn't you. Now, this is just one topic. I mean, it doesn't prove anything, but it was to me, it was pretty amazing, the timing, that just after we have that discussion about left-wing bias in social media, that we get our conversation suspended, and likely for something that I said, which likely was a conservative viewpoint.
Well, let me ask you first. Is this your first time? Have you ever had have you ever been suspended from social media? Have you ever had any of your stuff pulled?
No, I never have. Well, I've never really, I can't say I've made like one or two Facebook posts, and I tweeted one time that Thomas Sowell should have won the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's the extent of it. I could probably count on one hand the number. So the fact that I haven't been suspended is not too surprising.
All right. So you're rather new.
But I do know the only person that I know that has been suspended from social media is right wing, although maybe he deserved it. I didn't see what he was suspended for, but anyway.
I've been suspended from YouTube before.
What was it? What was the topic? What was it? What happened?
It wasn't politics. I had made a funny video. I thought it was funny, of a bird exploding, and and it was faked. Let me just say this up front: no birds were actually hurt. We made it look like that we had fed some birds Alka-Seltzer and that they blew up, but it didn't really happen. We had faked the whole thing. And I got the video pulled, and then I corrected it. I put a little disclaimer at the end that no birds were hurt. I put it back up, and then I got suspended from YouTube for it. I've also been suspended blocked from some subreddits, home improvement subreddits, because they said I was trying to advertise on the subreddit, which I wasn't. But it doesn't matter. The point being, with YouTube, they don't really pay a lot of attention to. They know when I challenge them. When I challenged them or I asked them to review the video, I got a message back in about 20 minutes saying, yeah, we're sticking with what we said. They didn't look at the video. Or if they did, they had someone in the Philippines that's making $4 an hour that goes and is not really all that focused on, what it actually says. Because this has been my experience before with the bannings that I've had. No, I've never been banned for political stuff, but we're there with their permission. We serve them. They don't serve us. And so they don't really care if we get upset about it or not. And of course, you and I are so small that's of no interest whether, we start bad-mouthing YouTube because our video got pulled. So this is new. But I can also see that if you are putting out a lot of political content and then you start getting flags and start getting bans, yeah, it's going to upset you. And I can understand that. But if you hadn't had the experience otherwise, then you might be a little bit upset by that.
If you hadn't had the experience otherwise, you might be. What do you mean?
If you hadn't had any other experiences of getting flagged or banned, the only thing was political content, and you're thinking, oh, this is YouTube, putting their thumb on the scale, trying to silence the true voices of the American patriot, or whatever it is that you tell yourself when you get this happens to somebody, then you might think that that someone's really going through your content minute by minute to really check and see how many times do they say this word, how do they get angry, do they raise their voice. They're not. They don't care. They give it a little bit of attention, they move on.
of course. No, I don't think people are thinking about it that way. I think that they're saying there is an attempt, maybe unintentional, to suppress certain viewpoints. And if they, and I think that the problem that people have with this, misinformation is a tricky thing because at one point, I mean, data changes. I mean, even Dr. Fauci changed his. Oh, I should be careful what I say, I guess. But it does seem like I don't think I'm out of line. Hopefully, we don't get banned for this as well. But I don't think I'm out of line to say that he said one thing about masks early on and then changed his tune. And then later admitted that he did it because he was afraid that we would make poor decisions if he told us the truth.
Right.
Uh, and if you're talking about things like, and so these things get flagged and so I guess what I'm saying is that what could be termed as misinformation at one point that could change at a later point. And when people are, that's the first problem I have with this is misinformation is such a tricky thing. I think there's some things that we can all agree on, like, I don't know, we shouldn't be racist. Like, yeah, if you're going to have racist or hate speech or something, and hate speech is even a loaded term, I guess, these days as well, because people have different definitions of what that is. But like, there's certain things that I think we'd all agree upon. And then there's a huge, somewhat gray area where people disagree. And if you're going to step into that space and say, well, I'm going to determine what is true and what isn't, you totally can. I can't stop Twitter from doing that. I don't think we should regulate Twitter or Facebook or any of these social or Google or anything else. They can do what they want. I understand that. I'm just telling you what I think they should do,
Sure.
given the space that they inhabit and the businesses they're purporting to offer us. I'm telling you what I think they should do. And they should just sit back and let people figure this stuff out for themselves. And from time to time, yeah, there's going to be some untruths told on the internet, but they should just step back and let people figure that out for themselves. Because when they don't do that, they start stepping in, then they, first of all, they invite all kinds of questions, but because it tends in one direction, it just seems like I don't know. I guess if they were doing it and it seemed that it was pretty unbiased, but they were still messing up from time to time, like they were hurting the left just as much as they were hurting the right, but it was still misinformation. I think people would be less bothered about it. But the fact that every person that we seem to hear about that's talking politically seems to be from the right that gets banned. Sure, yeah, there's violent content like people blowing up birds, these sick people that do those types of things. Are you listening?
I am listening. Yeah.
These people,
And
the people that blow up birds, these sick people. It was a joke. He didn't. but
what's
people
wrong
on the
with these
right,
people?
but people on the right, it just seems like it affects them disproportionately. And I realize I don't have good data for that, but all the stories that we hear from the right are, people getting banned are from the right, and all that we hear from the left is, well, why aren't we banning the right more? We actually don't ban them enough. We don't suppress them enough.
And so one of the things that comes up here is that people, it's almost like bad people on both sides argument from a just twisting it to the from the 180 degrees, where if we don't have people on the left complaining about being banned, then there must be bias. Is sort of what people are saying. And it's if you what people will sometimes say, if we step away from that argument for a minute, is that, well, there's bad people on both sides, so we shouldn't really go around saying one side is worse than the other. But what if, yes, there could be bad people on both sides, but sometimes one side has people that behave more egregiously, more violently, more aggressively. So while there may be bad people on both sides, they're not acting the same. And this is important because if we take now this social media argument, there are bad people on both sides, but what we saw earlier, what we talked and what you agreed with, is that people on the far right tend to be more pressing of fake news. There was the other article the other report that I showed you, where people on the far right also tend to use more violent and more aggressive language. And so these two aspects are going to lead to the greater likelihood of those on the far right getting flagged, getting disclaimers put on their posts, and then eventually possibly shadow banned and maybe even banned entirely. So I don't think you can say, if the left is being quiet about it, that must mean that's proof of bias.
All I'm trying to follow that argument. First off, I did not say that I agreed that was the reason that it happens more on the right. I'm not even sure that that study was correct. I just floated that as a possible reason. You know that that doesn't mean that it's okay that more people on. Am I making? I don't know if I'm being clear in what I'm trying to explain. This study you showed presented this idea, which I think you're saying right now as well, which is, yeah, maybe people on the right get banned more, but maybe that's because they behave worse. Is
Hmm.
that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're agreeing that I think then we can agree that people on the right seem to be disproportionately affected by suspensions, by banning, by shadow banning, all that type of stuff.
I'd say that there's probably that's probably true. I don't want to plant my flag on that hill and say absolutely I'll die by that, but I think that there is some evidence that that's true.
The study that you sent me seemed to indicate that. Now, I didn't agree 100% or I didn't understand 100%. It didn't seem clear to me from the article um, exactly what they had done, that their study was perfect, but it did seem like they were saying, hey, yeah, people on the right get suppressed a little bit more, get banned a little bit more, but that's because they tend to share more fake stories and share more hate speech and everything else. I am not necessarily agreeing with that. I'm not sure if that's true. I didn't agree from with their methodology based on what I could take out of that article. But that very well could be true. I don't know. And one possible explanation is, yeah, as I said before, and as you kind of were reiterating, maybe that's just one possible explanation is because people on the far right are uber violent white supremacists. They do share a lot of fake stuff. So that skews it a little bit in that direction. But that doesn't, all those things that you and I have both just said does not really account for the fact that there's people that are somewhat moderate that are getting banned. Like we got that conversation that we got banned, and we got banned. I think we can both agree it was for something that I said, and I'm not far right. I'm not even right. I'm libertarian. I like to think that I kind of inhabit a different space. But let's say I am more conservative or something. Like I'm not far right. I'm not white supremacist. It's people like me that I think people are more concerned about. Yeah, it's fine if the neo Nazis or something get banned. Nobody has a problem with that. But if there's people that are somewhat middle of the road, that are saying somewhat normal things that we just disagree with, or that I guess that Facebook or Twitter disagrees with, and it's always people on the right that they happen to disagree with them that are getting banned and suppressed and everything else, that's the issue, not so much the far right and the extremists.
Right. Um, and you are correct that is an issue. It's as you get closer to the middle, as you get in the extremes, most people will agree. Of course, unless you're in the extremes, then you won't. But as you get closer to the middle, you would get into that gray area. Is it right? Is it wrong? Some of the people were getting flagged about some of the vaccine statements that were being made, and the question, is it appropriate? Should you do it? And I get that these are difficult questions, and one of the ways that these social media companies address it is by having very clear policy. Now, you may not agree when that policy is being applied, like in our situation. They told us that we were spreading misinformation, couldn't figure out what that misinformation might have been. That was the label that was given: spreading misinformation regarding the COVID vaccine. Now, just to be clear, and I know that you meant it correctly, but I just want to kind of clarify some language. We were not banned. We had a video that was removed. We are still able to continue to put these videos on YouTube, just so that there's no confusion moving forward. And yeah, when you get to the middle, it does get a little more complicated. But I also think that we should have a conversation about what is evidence and what is not, because I think this was our big problem last week. And one of the questions that we were having is there bias against conservative voices? And a story about an example of something happening is not evidence, in my opinion, of bias against conservative voices, because the bias should be, we're talking about the social media companies having that bias. So it should be in a corporate culture, because if you can produce a story of showing that someone saw some right-wing voices being silenced, I happened to find another story that said the exact opposite, that there were people that said that the rule makers within Facebook were bending over backwards to try and take some of the pressure off of the right-wing voices. So if those two stories, let's say they cancel each other out, well, we're no further than we were before.
But are they evidence? Like, I think that maybe we're splitting hairs here, and maybe this is just an argument about semantics. But for you to say, I think those are two pieces of contradicting or conflicting evidence, and weak pieces. I'll agree. They're not conclusive, but they're two pieces of evidence. I mean, if for example, I went to, let's say a black person was attending the University of Mississippi, and he comes to the news and he says, "Hey, I was called the N-word, or I was called all sorts of horrible things." Is that evidence? I mean, that's evidence. It's not conclusive evidence. It's not comprehensive evidence. It doesn't mean that you got to shut down the university because, they've got to, but if you hear a number of different stories like that, that's more and more
Right.
evidence.
If this man comes forward and says, I was called the N-word, then there's evidence that a racist statement was made. Is that evidence that the culture within that location is racist? No. All that is that one person expressed a racist sentiment.
Right, but when that story from Gizmodo was two guys that said they were routinely removing conservative viewpoint stories from the trending topics,
I
and it
don't think
wasn't
I don't
just,
think routinely was in there. I don't think that was in there.
well, we can
And
look it
even
up.
if it were, you have two people that said, I saw the thing. I mean, that's because two people can say whatever they want.
Yeah,
And as
but
if you get two
you
people to say it, can I if I find two people to say something different, do we cancel each other out?
yeah, I think they do. I think they do cancel each other out. But I guess I would say this, Brian. You keep going to this one piece of evidence. I provided numerous. I think one other piece of evidence is the fact that we had, and I get it's weak evidence. We had a conversation removed, and why
That's
was it
not
removed?
corporate culture.
We both know why it was removed. We both know it was something that I said and not something that you said. Would
We
you
both
disagree with that?
assume. We're both
Yeah.
assuming.
Are you pretty certain? Because I'm pretty certain.
I'm assuming. Until someone comes and tells us the reason why, we're assuming. That's
Would
all
you
we can do.
assume? Would you assume it's you, or would you assume it's me?
I assume it's you, but
Yeah.
that's not proof.
No, but it's evidence of something, right? Like we both can assume because based on what we see in social media, based on all the news stories we see, based on all the evidence that's out there, which individually is inconclusive and at times weak, based on all of that, even you assume that it was something that I said in that conversation because we know that I had the viewpoints that I have the viewpoints that I have, and that's what would probably have gotten that story removed. And I get it's an assumption, and I get it's not conclusive evidence, and it's not evidence that there's a left wing. It's not. It doesn't make my case, but it is one further piece of evidence, and it's telling that both of us would assume it was something that I said. Like you keep going to this one little piece, like, "Hey, Colin, you shouldn't share that story because it's inconclusive," and then all these other things seem to add up to where both of us agree. The assumption was probably the right wing viewpoint that got that conversation removed.
Yeah, but we're still assuming, and you can have 1,000 people assuming, and it's still an assumption. It doesn't make it
I
evidence.
agree.
There are ways that you can prove it. There are ways that you can show that there's conclusive bias. And one of the ways you do that is by an outside examination of the data. And there was a bunch of people that did that. And when those people from the outside conducted these experiments, they found that the exact opposite was happening. If you go by your own personal experience and even by your friend's personal experience, the world is flat because we look at it, we see the horizon is flat. And so you need to be able to step beyond your own personal experience in order to recognize that there has to be a higher standard of proof in order to show that bias is occurring, not just our
Yeah,
own personal experience.
I like that word proof because I think that you're misusing the word evidence. When you say that's not evidence of bias, I think what you mean to say is that doesn't prove that there's bias. because it is evidence. It's just not proof.
It is evidence that someone behaved, let's say, inappropriately, or someone behaved in a certain way. It's not evidence of corporate culture, of corporate bias.
And when I looked at that study as well, like you said, well, an outside group, I think you dress it up in, I think the way you're describing it, I didn't read it the same way. To me, it was a good article, and it presented some good evidence, but it didn't prove the point. And I don't know if we want to delve into all this. It was tedious and tiresome to read through that whole article. Probably worth my while. But I saw some holes in it, and we could discuss that. I don't know how interesting that would be to our couple of listeners, um, but I, I don't know. I saw some holes in it, and in the same way that you're saying, or that I think you should be saying, "Hey, Colin, this doesn't prove your point. It's just evidence, and a lot of it's weak." I would look at that thing and say, Brian, it doesn't prove your point. It is evidence, but it doesn't prove your point. And I think we should make that distinction between evidence, or even if you want to call it weak evidence, and proving your point. It is evidence. It just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't prove the point.
Well, yeah, I guess the standard by which we decide these things. We're not in a court of law. In a court of law, they would have a different standard than one that we might use. And ultimately, this is two guys talking, two brothers talking, looking at it from different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we are. I mean, we're not out of time, but we are getting close to the end of time on this for this particular session. Um, rather than just keep rehashing the same points over and over again, which can get sort of tedious. Is there anything else related to what we talked about, or even anything else that you wanted to bring up?
No, I don't think so. I guess the one point I would make is, and I've made it once before, but at least in this conversation, I should make it again, is I understand you a couple of times have alluded to the idea that these are private companies, they have their standards. I wish they would be open. I wish they would say, hey, this is the piece of misinformation that you presented. This is why we had to remove you. I wish they were open with their algorithms, or at least more open with it, so we could see this stuff, because it's going to be impossible. Even that article you sent me said it would be impossible to prove this conclusively, without being able to look at how they actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wish there were more openness in all aspects of how they handle the suppression and the shadow banning and everything else that they're doing, the suspensions.
Yeah, I mean it's not a bad wish on your part, and I wouldn't be against it personally. The I think truthfully, if we ever saw the algorithm, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to us. I mean, it'd probably be a whole lot of math. But it would be interesting if they opened it up so that people could explore it a little bit. Not a horrible idea. Uh, the the next topic that we were going to talk about is I can't remember what it was that I said. It was something about um, how we get stuck in our mindsets, how we start to or how we can cut ourselves off from different opinions. Some of the different I wanted to look at some of the psychological concepts, some of the things like the boomerang effect, and the how we, when we get into groups of like-minded people, how the group gets a little more extreme in their perspectives. Some of that stuff, some of the ways that we can hopefully become aware of our own bad behavior and then maybe correct it, if that's acceptable to you.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for the conversation.
All right, Brian.
I'll
Thank
talk to you
you.
later.
Okay, see you.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.